welcome, especially all the males who are very brave and decided to join us today. Yeah! Cool, so welcome to the first event from Women's Futures Month. If you want to know about any of our other events, there's a wee flyer up the back, or you can visit our website if you haven't already. Can I just get a quick hands up of who came here via hearing about it online? Okay, yeah. Okay, I figured. Okay, so let's kick off. What we're going to discuss tonight is basically why it's important for us to have more women leading in science and engineering, and what the challenges might be for women and how we might overcome those challenges. So tonight, facilitating, we have Georgina Carvell, who is leader of Weerasinghe Science, which is a great club on campus for girls and guys. And I'll let the rest of the panel introduce themselves because they have lengthy achievements. So should we start with Science?
Right, go for it.
Thanks again for coming.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Amali Weerasinghe. I represent Computer Chicks. We are a social club for females in computer science and computer engineering. And I also work part-time as a senior tutor for the Department of Computer Science. And I'm also a final year PhD student. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Emily Ward. I am the treasurer of Women in Engineering. Women in Engineering is a social club for engineers. I'm a mechanical engineer in my 4th year of engineering.
As Zoe said, my name is Georgina Carvell. I'm the president and founder of the Weerasinghe Science Society, which is a club on campus focused on rationality and scientific literacy amongst students.
I'm Wendy Lawson. I'm the Dean of Science, and I've been the Dean of Science since the start of 2011. Prior to that, I was the head of the Department of Geography for 6 years. I've been in New Zealand for about 20 years now. I'm a glaciologist by scientific specialty, and I guess one of the interesting things about my pathway might be that I've spent about 15 or 20 summers either in alpine or polar regions, leading expeditions both to the Antarctic and to the Arctic. That's probably enough.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Lucy Johnston. I'm the Dean of Postgraduate Research here, and I've been in that role probably a couple of years now, and before that was Professor of Psychology in the Psychology Department. And so I was brought up here. I came here when I was 6 months old, but did all my tertiary education in the UK, as did Wendy, so we've got sort of that common pathway, and then I've been back in New Zealand, I guess, about 20 years again. So my sort of scientific background, if you like, I'm an experimental social psychologist, so just to put you all at ease, my speciality is in non-verbal behaviour, facial expressions of emotion, those sorts of things. But that's, and I'm also one of the management team in the New Zealand Institute for Language, Brain and Behaviour. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. All right. To start the discussion off, I have an anecdote for you. The eponymous blogger, female science professor, tells a story about the day that she was awarded one of her university's most prestigious medals. And later, after the ceremony, she was walking down the hall of her institution, and she overheard some male colleagues saying that they must have had to give the award to a quota, to a female, to fill the quota of female to male rate of females to males. And you might think that she would find this surprising, but in fact she didn't, because there is a stereotype about women in non-traditional roles, so women in male-dominated professions such as science and engineering, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. To start, in New Zealand, the universities have about less than 50% of female staff across the board. But Christchurch specifically is one of the worst places to be if you're a woman in research. The University of Canterbury and Lincoln both have less than 30% female staff. So I might let you guys comment on that, if you will.
I guess, no, so, alright, so again, if we have an anecdote, I left New Zealand when I was 10, and there was one female professor at the University of Canterbury. I came back when I was 25, and there was one female professor at the University of Canterbury. It wasn't the same woman. She had retired and been replaced by one other. And that's approximately 20 years ago. There are now 30 female professors on campus. So in some ways, the statistics aren't good, and it's true that Canterbury and Lincoln have a lower percentage of female academics, and particularly at the higher levels. But there has been a change, so I think we have to sort of recognise that there has been a change, and I think there's been a change in more than numbers. And I had a similar experience to the anecdotal female professor, where one of my colleagues didn't bother to talk to another colleague. Actually told me that the year I was promoted to professor must have been the year they were favouring women. So there still is that, but we have made strides, and I think when I was first asked to take part in this, and we were talking, a group of us, and it was like, my first reaction was, why is this still a question? Why do we still have to ask, what's the role of women in science and engineering? Why is there still barriers? And I think we have to focus on the opportunities, and ensuring that everyone has opportunities to do whatever they like. So it's not that we should be pushing women into science or engineering, but we should just be ensuring that there aren't any barriers to stop them if that's where they want to go. And as I say, I think things are improving, but not very fast in lots of areas. And women in engineering, again, the percentage is disdainfully small.
In our undergraduates, we've got around 15% of females, but funny enough, in postgrad, that increases significantly. So that's not really matching the statistics and research that you're providing.
So that was people who are employed by the university.
Yes, but I still find it interesting how women in engineering postgraduates are a lot growing, and also a lot greater than undergrads, especially when we've got low research.
If I may, I was just going to say, do you think maybe it's the barrier starts much earlier, so by the time that maybe the women get into engineering, they've taken that step, and it's kind of like there's not really as many barriers once you're in there. I don't really know, I'm not an engineer, but like what's it like actually taking the step and saying, okay, I'm going to start an engineering degree, maybe once you're in there, is it okay for women? Or
I find as a student, we are of the generation where we're a lot more accepting, so it's not too bad, but you do become a lot stronger as a female, and perhaps maybe people are going into postgrad because they don't really want to go into industry, and that's more of a concern, and we should be opening up opportunities into industry.
I just wondered, with that 30% of staff being female, is that 30% of teaching staff, 30% of staff overall?
I believe it's 30% of teaching staff.
So that's not including administrative staff?
I don't think so, no, it was teaching staff. Well, teaching and research staff, yeah.
And another interesting part of that picture is that if you unpack that a bit more, you'll find that, for example, fixed term contracts or less secure, and the lower echelons of the academic staff there's a greater proportion of women at that level, and that it thins out very rapidly towards the top. And that's one of the distinctive features of Canterbury's profile of women.
Yeah,
in the
well,
academic
that's
staff.
exactly right. And across the overall in New Zealand, there are only 13% of full professors. So that doesn't include associate professors or the lower echelons of the academic staff are female.
Wow, that's shocking.
Yeah.
So maybe Taji at least reflects some like a chronological factor in the sense that there are more undergraduates and postgraduates now coming into science and engineering, and that they're going to make it through to teaching.
That's the explanation that's been given for years, though, that it's a pipeline effect, and there's a bung in that pipe somewhere, because I mean, in certain disciplines, and I mean, although Wendy's a physical geographer, I mean, geography and psychology represent, if you're one wants to use those terms, the sort of softer end of science, if you like, and we both had been in departments where the proportion of female students is higher than most of the bench sciences, for example. It's been higher in postgrad, but it doesn't come through. So, yeah, somewhere there's a kink or a bung or something in that pipeline. I think it's a very convenient explanation. And also, if you look, I mean, I sat on the university promotions committee for 12 years, I think, and I would hand on heart say there was no discrimination ever that I saw in that promotion committee. But the problem is that women weren't applying in the same proportions as men. So the women who bothered to apply, it's all self-promotion here, self-application for promotion here. Women apply when they're certain, when they're really confident that they're going to get promoted. Men are more likely to chance it. And there's a whole swathe of reasons why that might be the same. But, you know, so I think it's too easy an explanation just to hope that it will change. Yeah.
Yes, I'm curious if the postgrad students there is a larger international component than the undergrad
There is.
Because in terms of STEM fields, there are some countries in which the male-female ratio is better than it is, at least in the United States where I'm from, and I suspect similar here.
Certainly, PhD students who are my life, it's about 50% international now, and I think you're right, and it speaks to some of the points about engineering. If you look at the female postgraduate engineering students, a huge proportion of them are international students. The male postgraduate engineering students are much more balanced, international, domestic. So I think you're right, and that's, you know, reflecting on cultural differences of what's appropriate to study and so forth. Yeah.
In terms of computer science, I think we are very young discipline in terms of other, community compared with other disciplines, and we have to kind of work through or overcome this society's perception about computer science is not just about fixing things, because everything IT and ICT and we are computer science and all these things are all meshed together. So I have had this experience with GPs, even at Canterbury University, when I say, what do you do? I'm a research student doing computer science. And he looked at me and said, so you're the person to call when the printer breaks down. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say anything while you're writing my description. But I think as computer scientists, as computer science researchers, we have to overcome that very change in that perception. Real computer science is about problem solving at a very massive scale. And I think females will be encouraged to do computer science if that perception goes to the society, because I think they are very good at problem solving, giving attention to detail and so forth. But if I think the university's traditional model is, when you come to a first year course, it's about learning language with very specific details, about fixing that comma or, to make it work. So many of the females don't see that as appealing as a, lifetime work. Whereas, for instance, Harvey College in United States, it's a private college which has a 50% participation of women in computer science classes. They are asked to do computer science for the first 2 years, and then they will move on to whatever discipline they want. They did 3 things at the university level. So the first thing they did was they got the computer science curriculum, also had some summer projects with first year students. So, and they were at the what we call the cusp of computer science, so they were more socially beneficial projects. And there is a very interesting and inspiring conference called Grace of a Celebration for Women in Computing. That's an all-female conference for women for computer science scientists of all levels, undergraduate, postgraduate. So rather than taking the postgraduates or somebody who's in second year, third year, they took the first year students. And they believe those three things help them to enhance their participation. So I think Canterbury has potential because we have this post 1-to-1. We have about 350, 400 students doing that because engineering students are encouraged to do that. But we still kind of use the traditional teaching model where you do the nuts and bolts, you teach the nuts and bolts rather than going with the application. Applications come, in the second year or third year. But if we want to actually increase the computer science participation, maybe we need to change the way that we teach that course.
If you felt that you wanted to implement something like they did in America that you felt would be beneficial for keeping more women, do you think that at the University of Canterbury you'd get the support to implement like a kind of what's called positive discrimination or whatever?
Yes, but I wouldn't call that positive
No, I wouldn't either,
discrimination.
but it's often
because,
framed like that.
The
Yeah.
course will be taught the same way to everyone. I would think so. I think it is a very exciting time for computer science here at Canterbury, partly because the only female faculty member and the professor in our computer science department is also the HOD. And Professor Jan Evans Freeman is the PVC, and we have all, Lee Postgraduate Studies, and we have all these accomplished women leaders at the top who have decision-making power. I definitely think it is possible to at least to try and see whether it can be, done. Different populations will react differently, but at least I think it's something worth trying.
Cool, thanks.
A lot of people sort of would probably look at you guys and be like, wow, look, we do have successful women as leaders in science. Why is this still an issue, do you guys think? If I could just get your opinion on that.
One thing that I would say in response to that is that women graduates, both at the Bachelor of Science and the PhD level, I'm not sure about engineering, but I'm sure Emily can fill us in on that, earn approximately $30,000 a year less than their male counterparts with the equivalent degrees and resumes. So that's one huge thing, the pay barrier. That's obviously it's quoted over and over again in not just in the science sector, but that's one huge thing that's stopping women from really fulfilling their roles as leaders in science and engineering.
Do you think that pay difference though, none of those stats actually reflect the jobs that people are doing? A lot of women don't choose to work. Do you think that, what I'm trying to say is, do you think that pay difference reflects that they're doing different jobs or working different hours in their
Well,
jobs?
they're absolutely doing different jobs. And we can see this as we talked before about the fact that there are far fewer women in the full professor and associate professor roles than there are in the other academic roles, right? A lot of women do fill lower paying jobs. But should that necessarily be the case?
Well, but is that a personal choice by those women? This is always the problem. Is that a personal choice by those women to do that lower paid job, or can they just not get to where they would really want to be?
Well, let's see.
Well, I guess, I accept your point, and I think you're dead right. There's a mixture of that, and that's why statistics are always useful if you use them to, back up your point. But you're right. Some people, both men and women, choose to have more flexible lifestyles, not take on responsibility, whatever it is. And there are. It's all I can remember my mother telling me with some glee not that many years ago that I used to give her a really hard time when she used to complain about men at work and sexism and her not getting promoted because the men were bastards. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to say that for the tape. And you know, I had obviously made some such comment, and you know, I'd always thought that my life, my career was kind of gender neutral, that I hadn't been influenced by being a woman. And I think it's a really difficult situation because it's very easy to attribute your lack of success or something to, is it because I'm not good enough, or is it because they're sexist? And similarly, it's not only your failures, you get exactly the same with your successes. You know, did they promote me because I was a woman, or did they promote me because I'm fantastic? And so there's a lot of research that suggests that women and ethnic minorities not only sort of suffer more of the negative, they're discriminating against me, but they also fail to get the positive, if you like, because they think, oh, I only got that because of. So I've always tried to, as much as possible, just sort of say, look, it's about me doing my job and being as good as I can be. And as I said, like right at the beginning, I think the thing that I would like to think that I can do in any position of leadership or influence that I have is to make sure there are not institutional barriers that prevent women following whatever path they like. Women may choose not to go down different paths, they may not find certain areas exciting, whatever, but that's, if it's their choice, absolutely fine. And so it's ensuring those institutional barriers, and that's a culture shift, and it's tough. But I think all we can try and do as female, Wendy's giving me this look. All we can try and do, I think, is do our job well, and you know, be respected for doing our job. And we happen to be women. I think I don't personally like that idea of feeling that because I'm a woman, somehow I always have to be defending the role of women. I am a woman and I'm proud of it, but I'm proud of how I do my job regardless of that. And I think that to me is the important thing, of showing that I can do this job.
So if I could just respond in a slightly different way to the question, because we've talked about pay gaps and roles. I think one of the most important things that women do in engineering and science is whether they're in classic leadership roles by role or whether they're embedded in a team is role model. They do things differently, and in particular I think that that science, I mean, I know a lot more about science than I do about engineering, but I know that science as a profession can be incredibly competitive, and that's expressed by people trying to knock spots off other people and prove that they're better. Now, I think one of the consequences of having women doing science and women in a team is that people are looking for a win-win solution more often. I think women are more inclined to seek a win-win solution rather than a win-lose solution, and I think that applies whether it's in a scientific team of trying to work together rather than to work in competition with some other team and prove that you're better. And so I think that that's one of the biggest challenges and one of the most important leadership roles. And of course the risk when you're on the leading edge of, the leading edge of a population, it seems to have, not a lot has changed in the last 20 years, is that it's really hard work to be the person who's doing that all the time and sort of trying to do that, and I think it often gets lost in the wash when we think about just if we look at Dean of Science or the Dean of Postgraduate Studies or the PDC of Engineering, it's too easy to say, oh, it's all fine because those people are all women, so what's the big problem? I think a lot of it is about the practice and the culture of those professions, and I suspect it is played out in engineering in the statistics you were talking about before, about the number of females at undergraduate and postgraduate and what the culture of those sort of different groups are like and what's going on.
Yes, and I do agree that we bring something different to the table as well, but at the same time we don't want to be seen as just women bringing something different. We want to be seen as individuals, and hopefully if we everyone to have individuality.
I was just going to mention the whole idea of being like the exception rather than the rule. I think a lot of the times, like women who are really accomplished, often people, minorities especially, I'll use women as example because it's relevant, they're seen as like, oh, you are, oh, what a great job for a woman. And whereas a lot of the time, other people who are in more hegemonic roles don't have to represent their sex or their race or their anything else. So I think the idea that we haven't, I mean, obviously we've come far from having one female professor, but I don't think we can stop because it's still the exception and not the rule. And until someone can say that's a fantastic professor, not she's such a fantastic woman, like she's a fantastic professor, she does well, she represents women well. When we can just kind of be the rule rather than the exception, I think that's something we should work towards. Yeah.
So I mean, I've got heaps of stories about being a woman and being a woman in field science. Being a woman in field science has been a particularly interesting pathway, and one of the reasons I'm in New Zealand is because when I was a student, I knew I wanted to study glaciers, and I knew I wanted to go to Antarctica. I'd been to the Arctic a lot, and I knew I wanted to go to Antarctica. The British Antarctic Survey did not take women at the time that I was looking to enter employment. It's amazing. It's probably amazing for you guys to think about that. When I was an undergraduate, the British Antarctic Survey had a careers talk at the university I went to, Manchester. And I was in this talk, and the room was full of mostly physics undergraduates and me, and I think I was probably the only woman in the room. And the man who gave the talk did not mention through the entire talk that women couldn't actually go to the Antarctic. And I put my hand up at the end and said, what about women? And he said, oh, there were some lovely jobs in the library in Cambridge. And thereby began a campaign. I ran a campaign, not a campaign exactly, but quite a campaign to ask everybody from the British Antarctic Survey when women were going to be allowed to go. And I heard some amazing things. One was, if women were allowed to go, my wife wouldn't let me go. It's one of the best. Another really good one was, we don't have women's toilets down there.
They're fundamentally different from that.
Absolutely.
Solved, I thought. And so, so one of the reasons I'm in New Zealand is because in New Zealand it was a non-issue. Never had been an issue, was not an issue. Of course, that didn't stop various moments of prejudice and assumption transpire. I'll never forget a night in the bar at Scott Base, one of many. But a helicopter pilot came into the bar and was talking to me. At this stage, I was in my late 20s and leading my expedition down to Antarctica, a small expedition. But the helicopter pilot was talking to me about the science we were doing, and then he said, "So who's leading your expedition? And where's your leader?" You looking at her? Another event, I'll keep going, one more story that's quite interesting. We were in the camp in the dry valleys area of Antarctica, and there's several interesting dimensions to this story, but the Americans, none of these streams had names, and the Americans had begun this big project in this valley, so they were walking up the valley, naming everything as they went, because they wanted to be able to draw a map and put the names on the stream. Big project called the Long-Term Ecological Research Project, the Dry Valleys. And they'd kind of got about 7/8 of the way up the valley and realised they'd named everything after Americans, and they realised it was a bit rude because this part of Antarctica there's a major Kiwi operation too. So they started looking around for Kiwis to name things after. And they walked into our camp one day, and there were two of us there, a male and a female, me and my field assistant. And they walked up to the male and said, "Right, who's in charge here? You must be in charge. What's your name?" And he went, "She's in charge." Anyway, so I ended up with a stream named after me in Antarctica. They were desperate by the time they got there.
Dried up stream?
Well, I did write and say, they sent me a fax a while later saying, "Please send your CV because this is going through the US Geographic Names Board." And I wrote this long letter back saying, "I'm deeply honoured by this, but I have, my contribution has been a lot less than some other Kiwis, and here's a suggestion of a list of names." And it was a long letter. And I got a very brief message back from the female PI of the project saying, it's a small stream, please send a CV.
Right, there were some hands up here and here. Did you still?
It was more talking about the pay gap between the salaries. I work at the warehouse, so obviously I don't have experience in the professional career path. But I'm just wondering, I hear from the outside that a lot of the promotions are created because a lot of people approach the employer and ask them, or through negotiations. Is it possible, maybe through the perception that they shouldn't go up, that could be causing the public pay gap?
Absolutely.
Like a confidence issue.
Yeah. And it's that sense of not a fear of failure and the perception. So say often women won't put themselves forward because they don't want to have to deal either themselves or what they think other people might think of them if they don't. So, and I'm making gross generalisations. Some men think exactly that too, and some women don't give a damn and will do it. So we are talking generalisations, but certainly there's a lot of evidence to suggest that may well be it, that there isn't that same willingness to ask and demand. Yeah.
And I think one of my experiences as an academic is that I've been on the receiving end of many discussions with students about doing postgraduate work, and typically I think this is a gender-related thing. Typically, the males, once they get to that stage of having a conversation with the academic, are fairly confident they can do it, and they never say, "I don't think I can do it." I've been on the receiving end of many conversations with female students with an A grade average or an A plus grade average saying, "Oh, I don't think I'm good enough." I've never been on the receiving end of a conversation with a male student with an A grade average saying, "I don't think I'm good enough." And I think it's part of the same thing. It's a fundamental lack of confidence. I think there's a reluctance to take risks as well, to give it a go, see what happens. So I think there's a whole range of things in there, but that's one of my experiences as an academic.
One of my favourite experiences, well, Wendy's telling stories about herself, I'll tell one about her. It's not about you dancing on the tables. So when I think it was when you went for the Dean of Science job, but it might possibly be when you went for head of department and geography, Wendy stupidly asked me if I had any advice on being interviewed and so on, because I'm a psychologist. And so I sent her an article which was published in a very prestigious journal not very long ago, which suggested that women were more likely to succeed in job interviews if they had a deeper voice. So Wendy ran me up to practice. And she became both head of geography and dean of science. But there's lots of things. How women dress at interview has a huge influence too. It's it sounds really stupid, but if you're going for a job in particularly in a male-dominated profession, don't wear a dress. Wear a suit. It's got to be feminine enough, but it's a suit. It looks like what boys wear.
I read an interesting article a while ago, written by someone, I think it was consultancy department. He was in charge of hiring people, and more importantly, he was in charge of deciding what income to put people on, salaries. And he said, because there was this discussion about whether the pay scale was actually to do with inherent sexism, even though it's not explicit, and he said out of all the people that he interviewed, he almost never came across a woman who
was about the year I became a professor, and again, we have to put ourselves up for promotion, and I was dithering in that way that we do. Actually, I just dither, I have no idea whether it's anything to do with being a woman. But my mentor in my department, who was male, still is, gave me this really sound advice. He said, it was a year I'd just gone through divorce and things weren't great, and he said, how bad can this year get? You may as well take it this year, because if you fail, it's not going to make you worse. So, and that was great advice, because I applied and got promoted. So, you know, listen to that helpful suggestions when they're there. But, you know, I'd have fallen into the same. I wouldn't have applied if he hadn't put it so supportively.
It's interesting though, because a lot of the really good negotiators are either known or good or seem to be women. And the fact that they kind of know all the variables and when they start making their offers.
And I think that win-win solution thing is actually a really good place to start, in negotiating. That there is usually a win-win position in most problems that need solving. There's a position that everybody can get something out of it.
I'm a terrible negotiator.
But also I think, and it's in like lots of things, I mean, Wendy made the point, I think it was Wendy made the point earlier about, you know, you could just look and go, oh, Dean of Science is a woman, Dean of Postgraduate Studies is a woman, PBC Engineering is a woman, New Zealand's Prime Minister was a woman, Solicitor General, Attorney General, Governor General, etc. It must be sweet here. I think if you're good, you're very good. And so you get known for it, you know what I mean? So there's those few that are held up. But if you actually start looking at it, it's the same example all the time. It's the same few women that are held up as those examples. And that's not to say they're not great, but it gives that false perception that there's all these great women negotiators. There's not, there's a few, but they're really good. And so they're salient. And I think you get that in lots of cases where you can grasp at an example. And, you know, I mean, Margaret Thatcher was the example for years.
Oh.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, you know, over the years, one thing that I've pushed myself out of my comfort zone, I'm sure it's partly a female thing, is to take risks, especially in applying for jobs. So in other words, it doesn't matter if you've got a job and you apply for another one, who cares? And so it's, I mean, and one of the things that's been said to me is, you know, nobody's going to rush up and give you a job, and you have to go out and get the job you want. One of the things that I've found really fascinating, and that it remains the case in the university at the moment, I think, is that when people are thinking about the next, you know, if there's a vacancy coming up at the senior management level or something like that, so the most senior levels, not the professorship pathway where you essentially you're volunteering yourself to be considered, but when there's a vacancy coming up, it's very funny that I find that the people who are talked about and the people whose shoulders are tapped are inevitably the males in the senior echelons. And it's almost sort of the senior females remain invisible. It's utterly fascinating, and I think there's a subconscious. I don't think it's conscious. I'm sure it's not conscious, but there's still this prevailing sort of sub-old boys club thing going on, and it's extremely subtle. I mean, one of the conclusions I've come to in all of this is that over the years, over the decades, the gap has narrowed. The problem has become smaller. I mean, there's no denying. You know, there was one female professor 20 odd years ago, and now there's 30. That is a good thing in terms of the recognition of women and their achievements. But one of the conclusions I've come to is that, so we started off with a huge gap, and the gap has got smaller and smaller. The gap has become much harder to bridge in many ways because it's very subtle. It's not conscious. Nobody's making rude comments or pinching anybody's bottom or, you know.
Things just aren't what they used to be.
But that gap, I think the pace of change has slowed. And I think one of the issues is that because it looks better, for the younger generation, so you guys are, a lot of you are a generation below us. It looks better from where it looks better from where you sit than it did when we were your age. And I know, I mean, I've got two teenage daughters. One of whom's she's she's interested in physics, and who knows what she'll do at university. She's year 13. But I find that talking to teenage girls about this whole issue of, the recognition of women and such, they just go, what's the problem? What do you want about?
But I think I thought that too when I was a teenager. I'd have said exactly the same, and because you don't kind of see it, and also a lot of school teachers are female, even, that's a disproportionate thing. But I mean, one thing to think about in this is, and I find myself doing this, when you're going to a doctor, obviously don't go to the same one, but if you're thinking about going to a doctor, or you're thinking about, if you're thinking about going into postgrad work and you're thinking about potential supervisors and so on, is it something you take into account? To what extent do you think, you might think, I'd like to study X. Does it matter if it's a male or female who might be supervising you? Does it matter when you're going to the doctor? Do you make those choices? And I think it is something that we perhaps don't think. I mean, it never occurred to me in terms of PhD supervisors, for example. I wanted to do a topic, and who's the expert? Right, I'll work with you. And it never occurred to me that they might be some other sort of role model. They weren't. But it is. In some other areas, it is something that occurs to me. So, I think in some ways it's putting the onus back on you as the next generation coming through, because if it matters to you that there are female role models around, well, have a female on your supervisory team. Acknowledge that. Is there a way that you can actually advance that too? Because otherwise, it remains that distinction between, how do we grow it collectively, I guess. I'm not saying compromise the quality of your supervisors. They don't know anything about it, but they're a woman, so I'll have them. No, but you have supervisory teams and so on, and I think there are ways to think about how we might enhance that empowerment.
Going back to Lucy's point, I'm finding as a female engineer it's actually in favour for us. More companies are trying to hire more equally, and so there are a lot more opportunities for females. Whether that's bad for us that we don't feel it's worthwhile, I'm still happy with the job. And so that's a benefit for us. And an example I had is at a careers fair, I approached a company being interested in it, and within a few sentences he said, we're all about equal opportunities at this job. And that to me just saw that all he saw was us female. He didn't really see that I might have qualities as an engineer.
And I think you're picking something really important there too, that it's all very well, I think you're right, there are lots of companies, particularly in things like engineering, who are thinking, there's a female, we ought to hire her, sort of thing. And that's fine, and that's a great attitude in lots of ways, but it's about how you're treated once you're in that company. What are the institutional setups when you're there? Because sometimes, managers think we need to have women or whatever in the company, and so they insert them, but there's no company ethos or female toilets or whatever it is, and it actually makes it worse in some ways that be imposed. So it is balancing those opportunities, but I think you're dead right. If someone only sees you as a woman, don't take the job.
In terms of committees at universities, say for example, ethics committee, academic board, etc., what is the percentage of women in science and engineering that are part of those committees compared to, say, arts or other colleges? Or, science and engineering professors, etc., going for those committees?
Sorry, are you talking about the committee of the club?
University
ethics.
companies like academic board.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, academic board, I think it would be fair to say that there are fewer women on the representing science and engineering on the academic board than there are representing arts. But I think that's probably representative.
Well, but I think there are more, I did do the numbers on, but I think there are actually more female professors in the College of Science than any other college. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. between the seniority and academic rank and the representation or the membership of committees sometimes.
I don't know about within the university setting, but I do know that in the Crown Research Institute, the number of women who are in the management roles and on the boards, the scientific advisory boards and so on for those companies is disproportionately low. For example, Plant and Food Research has only 9 women on a team of 39, so that's less than 25% are female there, although their staff is a lot closer to half and half distributed.
It's interesting, I'm on the board of NIWA actually, so I'm in one of those board roles. And our board, as a matter of interest, but I think it's probably atypical of the CRI boards, we have the 6 board members and the chair. The chair's a man, there are 3 females and 3 males on the board. Interestingly, I mean, we tend to think of, well, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there's none of the CRIs are currently, none of the chief executives are female. I think one of the board chairs is female. I think that it's an even more masculine culture in the CRI sector. My observations, limited, but might be typical. It's an even more masculine culture in the CRI sector, so the Crown Science sector, than in the university sector. And I think one of the big things that's driven change in the university sector is the demographics of the students coming in. In other words, there's no escaping the sort of overall 50-50 demographic of the 18-year-old incoming. And it's it varies, obviously. In engineering it's really low, the female percentage, but I think it drives a lot of the cultural change at universities, which ends up to a certain extent reflecting the student body, which is only how it should be. And that, of course, the CRIs are not subject to the influx of the dynamism of the 18-year-olds every year on a regular basis, and all the they don't have an orientation week with music throbbing in through your office windows. Can't talk to people on the phone and what have you. So.
And to Lucy's comment on how we can make a difference even at a small scale, in computer science we have group projects, and so you get 1 or 2 females in a group, and many of the time they're called the doc chicks, meaning documentation chicks. So as Linda pointed out yesterday, who is in the audience, we had a talk. She gave us a talk on 38-year reflections on computer science, and one of her suggestions was don't be the note taker all the time. So they assume, like the other guys in the team assume, oh, you're the chick, you can do the note taking. I mean, it is probably a fact that we do it better than anyone else. But as she pointed out, don't be the note taker. Participate in the discussion. Take the seat. You can. She had a very good suggestion. Let somebody do a second-hand job on note taking and offer to tidy it up, but don't willingly go, okay, I'll do this. No, absolutely.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question. Does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up?
I don't have a question, but it's just a comment in response to what you were saying earlier about whether the pay gap is more reflective of women not going into those jobs because of personal reasons. And I think there's 2 things that sort of brings up. First, it's kind of buying into is the fact that we've got less female professors just because women aren't good enough, which is obviously not true. And also, there have been research that in the exact same job women pay less. So in the United States, I only really know about medicine, but women doing the exact same job, and doctors are actually getting paid less, regardless of the hours worked. And also, I think it's important to not use it as an excuse, to more be like, well, I want to get that job, so I'm just going to make that room for me here. And as I said, I'm sort of a medical professional, so there's a lot of feels like surgery that is very male dominated because there's not much scope for having family, and you can't do time sharing.
I've always wanted to ask that, what do you call a female surgeon? Because you call a male surgeon Mr. They stop being doctor and they become, what do you call a female surgeon?
Ms. or Miss or Mrs. whatever they are.
Okay.
one should be working such shit
Well,
hours.
exactly.
And they've just always been able to take advantage of the fact that men did the significantly less unpaid work around the house and with children, that they could just spend their entire lives in an operating theatre and, no one would censure them for it and there wouldn't be any disadvantages, but, maybe actually that's bad for them too.
Yeah.
Maybe they shouldn't have to do a 120-hour working week.
A study done at the University of California, Berkeley, found that of the top sort of 30 US universities, they had 40%, that is almost half of the men in academia had wanted to take parental leave but had felt that they weren't able to and had not taken parental leave because of the increased, and the increased penalisation of men trying to have family responsibilities.
I can't remember what country it was, but it was probably Sweden or something like that. They have parental leave that's given to the couple to divide up between them, between maternity and paternity.
France, it's the same here. I mean, at the university, if a person has a baby, if a male who is an employee's wife has a baby, then he is
or even their partner
to parental leave.
You don't actually have to get married to get parental leave here.
So I mean, I think that's available. I mean, the issue in New Zealand is just the short amount of statutory parental leave. It's not a realistic amount of time for a family to adapt to the presence of a new individual, and so it's I mean, that's the challenge I think here.
But it is something
and the
I
burden
can
does seem
say
to fall on the woman rather than the.
And the cultural expectations. I mean, it never ceased to amaze me when I dropped my daughter off to school, and if I had any interaction with the teacher at the one time she dropped her off at school and she'd forgotten something, and so I went to talk to the teacher, and the teacher simply assumed, and I'm sure it wouldn't have been the same if I was a man, simply assumed that I would be able to nip home and get it, that I didn't have a job to go to. It was absolutely a fascinating experience. So it's continued to amaze me in New Zealand. It's different in the UK because I went on sabbatical with my daughter. When you pick a child up at 3 o'clock, the proportion of the adults picking the children up who are male and who are female, that is the most stark statistic in terms of roles in society. It is consistently 95% female picking up. And I'm sure that a lot of those women are juggling their careers and their children. It's just that the men who are fathers are not there.
It's never seen as a compromise though. Like, I've spoken to a few people, and I don't know if it was in a job interview setting, but they've kind of said, oh, so are you wanting to have a family, or do you have a family? And as though it was kind of like a compromise, but it's almost assumed that it won't have to be an issue if you're a man, which is kind of.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so many. The gender role and the gender inequality is still always the assumption that women are going to do the homemaking and stuff, and like, I mean, apart from the actual gestational period and like a little bit, why can't it be assumed that it can be shared a bit more equally? But it's more the exception again.
I think there's an added. I think there's an added factor as well, that women, businesswomen or women who have professional jobs that they go to, have a sort of discontinuity between their role as a mother and their role as a professional, in that the ideal professional has all their time and resources available for their work, and the ideal perceived mother has all their time and resources available to be dedicated towards their children.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things for me around this whole thing about the difference for males and females, for mothers and fathers, when I had my child, it was a long time until I went to Antarctica for a long period of time. Not because anybody told me I couldn't, but I did not want to leave my child for 6 weeks and be away from her. My male peers and colleagues, it wasn't an issue, and I've yet to meet a father a sort of field science father who hasn't want to go, in a visceral way. I'm not talking about.
I'd argue that there's a lot that I talk to who wish they had the strength to say they wouldn't go, but they
Yeah.
daren't.
Yeah.
So they don't want to leave their children, but they do. Whereas
Yeah.
you have the strength to say, I don't want to
Yeah.
leave my child and I'm not going to. I think that's, and that comes down to societal expectations
Yeah.
too. So we can occasionally feel sorry for men.
I just had an anecdote, we need to finish, that a friend was applying, well, a friend of a friend was applying for jobs, and in the job application process she would just say, well, I need, 2 weeks off in September because I'm getting married. And every job that she applied for, she said that, didn't get the job. As soon as she sort of like, oh, maybe I'll just rethink this, and she said, I need 2 weeks off in September for a holiday. Immediately got every job she applied for. And there was sort of this idea whether there was this expectation that because she was getting married, that would lead to maternity leave in the future and less job continuity. It's just like, is that so subtle that that would be, or is it just?
I suspect it's deeply subconscious for the panel.
Yeah.
The issue of, I'm pretty sure it's illegal to ask about intentions with respect to having a child.
It's
and
illegal
it
to
is.
ask marriage.
So if any of you are ever on the receiving end of that, I would simply decline to address the issue.
Which wouldn't probably go down well either.
I did it in an interview. I was asked in an interview if I intended to have a family, and I said I don't think that's of any concern. And I did get offered the job. I turned it down. But
On principle.
well, partly, but also I thought I didn't want to work somewhere where they were going to ask me that. So I'd already made up my mind that I didn't want to work there. But boy, I was going to tell them why. So in my best, politest kind of way, I pointed out to them that they weren't allowed to ask me.
Just to add to what she said, Sheryl Sandberg, you might have heard about Sheryl Sandberg. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook. She's awarded one of the 5 most influential women in the world. And she has this phrase, which is also quoted by Linda, called "Don't leave until you have to leave." Meaning, females, when they join the workforce, they go, oh, I'm going to start a family soon, so I better not put my hand up for the next big project or next big promotion. So by the time you actually get pregnant and it's time to go away for 10, whatever the time period, you're not only 10 months behind, you're already 2 years behind, and the company probably will start to see you as a liability. But if you give your best shot, be the best employee, then you have the advantage of negotiating that will work out to your advantage, because I personally believe this is the best of times for the women in technology, because you don't have to be physically there to do the job now, which is one of our basic things. Coca-Cola actually gave one of their top employees, who is a female, she said, I have 2 young children, I can't move to Europe. And they said, fine, we'll work around it. You will have to just go there every 6 weeks. Other than that, you can still be stationed in your own place and you can do the job. So I think this is quite an advantageous time for women, especially in technology and the related areas, because you don't have to physically be in the location, which is one of our primary barriers to do the job with taking care of children.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's about time to wrap it up now.
Originally what was going to happen was that there was going to be half an hour of sort of audience questions until 8:30, but it's great that everyone's just sort of asking. I just thought I'd just touch on one last thing that we haven't quite covered as much as, so I just wanted to ask everyone on the panel, what do you think we can do as individuals, whether it's, potential future parents or sisters or brothers, what do you think we can do as individuals on an everyday level to challenge those sort of more subconscious biases that maybe contribute to the stagnation of our progress as leaders?
Support and encourage anyone to do what they want, be they male or female, and try and help them overcome any barriers. Don't try and think, oh, there's a barrier against women, I'm going to go and fight that barrier. Do it on supporting the individuals, and those barriers will come down. It's easier to fight that way, I think.
I think proving ourselves as individuals is important as well. Proving that we can do just as good a job, no matter our gender.
I agree with her. Be really good at what you do. I think personally you can't do all again, Sheryl Sandberg's vision is to see 50% of the institutions in the world ruled by women and 50% of the homes taken care by men in some future.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that my main addition to that would be to put yourself out there to all the opportunities that arise. You know, if there's something that might potentially eventuate into an opportunity you'd be interested in, go for it. Say, look, is this a possibility?
Echoing that, and I mean, Lucy said support others, or ask for support yourself. I mean, that's a two-way process. Take risks, put yourself out there, put your hand up. It's not the end of the world. If the answer's no, it's not the end of the world. And ask for what you want and what you think you're worth. Don't be the girlie who sits there and you get offered 80,000 and go, oh, thank you, that's great. Be the person who says, actually, I think I'm worth 100,000. What do you reckon? Be that person who pushes the boundaries, takes risks, and asks what you want. Nobody's going to give you what you want unless you ask for it.
But I think that I agree completely with that. But I think the corollary of that is deal with it if you're not back. Don't sort of internalise it. Oh, I'm pathetic. If you're gonna put yourself out there and take the risks and whatever, then you've got to be prepared for someone to say no.
Can I
deal with
also suggest that as future parents or as people interacting with girls, don't say, oh, you're so pretty. Say, you're confident, you're so smart, you did so well on your test. You can, I would love to be able to say, I would ask in an interview, no, I'm worth 100,000, but there's so many subtle social gender roles to overcome that I would probably embarrassingly say that I'd probably say, oh yes, 80 grand actually sounds pretty good. So to my daughter, I'm going to say, no, you jump over every hurdle, and you're worth much more than what society may value you for. So.
But say it to your son too.
Oh, absolutely.
Apparently they like round numbers, so if they offer 80k, offer like 92.
Yeah.
I think as well it's very important, it's great that we're empowering our daughters, but it's equally important that we teach or talk to our sons and say, value women for the merits that they have, so that they grow up with that equality, and then they will carry on later in life. So it starts in the home.
I've got a poster on my office door, admittedly my office door in psychology, not in the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's office for obvious reasons, and it says, it's a picture of a boy and girl and their parents, and it says, preparing their daughter for future life, we're giving her less pocket money.
Could say it's already happening. It's kind of uncanny seeing the amount of guys that know how to cook compared to the amount of girls.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's easy to neglect some of that, but you're right. There is more and more of doing more in the home. But again,
especially since last generation of parents, my dad didn't do much to raise me. Most of what I've been taught from my own mum. So, yeah.
Awesome.
excellent.
Well, we hope you guys found that sort of useful / amusing. Thanks for all having such a great sense of humour as well as being really informative. If anyone wants to talk to our speakers, we've got about a quarter of an hour, so you can sort of hassle them before they finally run back home. Otherwise, feel free to hang around and grab some noodles at the back there. And thank you so much for coming along and being progressive enough to realise that this was actually an issue. Because, we posted up a press release, and some of the comments we got back sort of convinced me that, okay, actually we do need to have a women's futures month after all. Cool. So that concludes the official talk part of the evening.
Thanks everyone for coming. It was really great, and there were some really awesome questions and engaging, and it was inspiring.
If you have any questions about Resonance Science Society, women in engineering, or computer chicks, or the Faculty of Science in general, come and ask us, feel free. Also, the rest of the Women's Futures Month events are going to be great. The information is all on Facebook.
Yeah.